Hello, I'm Mike Howie, and I'd like to welcome you to Frog Live Radio for September 2011. And first up, on behalf of Frog Recruitment, may I extend our thanks to you, the listener, for your interest and support in what we're doing here in interviewing a series of very interesting people from around the world. And may I say, where can you listen to, say, Dr. Jane Goodall last month, who was a conservator and a chimp fanatic, and then 1 month later today we're going to turn and talk to a hunter turned gamekeeper turned big gamekeeper, and I'm sure this man would admit that along the way he's been a poacher. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome to Frog Live Radio Paul Brislen. Hello, Paul.
Hello, I'm in good company, aren't I, with Jane Goodall? Wow, crikey.
Yeah, if she heard you what I said about you, she'd probably want to outlaw you. Now, but let's put the listeners out of their misery. Can you introduce exactly who you are, Paul, and what you do today?
Today, well, at the moment I am the Chief Executive of TUANZ, the Telecommunication Users Association. And we are a lobby group who represent customers of the cell phone companies, the landline companies, the broadband companies, and we try to represent their needs both to the businesses themselves, but also at government level when they're thinking about investing or restructuring or regulating the industry. We try and get involved and represent the users' needs.
Okay, so before we get on to that, which is interesting, we're going to hear a lot about this. Well, let's go right back, and a question we always ask our guests. Paul Brislen, what was the first job you ever had in your young life? The first time you got paid?
The very first job I had was probably stocking shelves at a food town in Hamilton about 300 years ago. But that didn't last very long. I ended up as a pizza delivery driver. And ended up working in restaurants for a long time and learning about customer service from the wrong end of the stick by dropping pizzas off at people's houses in the middle of the night.
So what did you know what you wanted to do when you left school? Did you go, because I know you will talk about your journalistic career, but did you go straight into journalism, or did you take a few years to find out where you wanted to go?
Well, I always wanted to be a journalist, and I always wanted to get into journalism. And, of course, at school I did absolutely nothing about doing anything that would have helped with that. I was at Waikato University studying English literature and international politics in late 80s, early 1990s. When I ran out of money, basically, the government of the day changed some of the rules around university subsidies, and instead of paying $4,000 or $5,000 a year for fees and having a subsidy for accommodation and subsidies for summertime jobs, overnight we went to a situation where a whole raft of us ended up with absolutely no cash and couldn't finish our degrees and were stuck, basically. So there followed probably about 10 years in the wilderness, working in restaurants and trying to make ends meet and scrabble around to finish studying. And from there, I sort of just slipped sideways back into what I'd always intended to do in the first place, which was get into journalism. And looking back, it was probably a good thing that I didn't go straight into university study and then into journalism itself, because you get a great grounding and a great opportunity to meet lots of varied people by working in the real world. And I think that's held me in good stead ever since.
So what was you were around, and we'll quickly just talk about your career. Would I be correct to say that you were around at the dawn of the internet, or the dawn of the information highway, as far as reporting on it, or not?
Yes, pretty much. Certainly not the very early days, but not too long after it had started to make headway. I was a sub-editor at TVNZ in the teletext department, and our team were responsible for putting the subtitles on television programs for the deaf viewers. And at that point, programs from overseas would come in, and they would courier a CD, actually it was a floppy disk, with the subtitles embedded on it. And we ran into quite a bit of trouble because occasionally the subtitles would arrive and they would be scrambled. You wouldn't be able to use them. And this was because of X-ray machines at the airport or something going on with the floppy disks. And I had the brave idea of contacting them and seeing if they couldn't post the subtitle files up on a website somewhere, this newfangled thing called a website, and potentially we could then just open the file from our end. There would be no more couriering costs, and there would be no more need to ship these discs all around the planet, and no more missed subtitles either, which would be tremendous. So we tried this out. We did this one day, and we used a bulletin board, and somebody in the UK posted these subtitles on a bulletin board, and we then extracted the file from the other end, and it was science fiction.
Wow!
And it was the first time any of us had ever come across the internet at all. And all of a sudden they decided, yes, well, you'll all need an email address, and we'll be able to do this in future. We'll just send the file straight to you via email and attach it to the file, attach it to the email itself. And we were blown away. It was quite ridiculous. This would be the early, mid 1990s. So we weren't exactly early adopters, but from there, getting into journalism itself as a reporter and writing for Computerworld newspaper at the time, I was lucky enough to encounter a team of journalists who had not only plenty of experience in journalism itself, who could train me up, but also lots of experience in the IT world, who could, at the drop of a hat, down tools and get out the whiteboard and explain what a level 2 cache is, or why speed on the internet is measured in bits while storage is measured in bytes, and generally speaking, train me up like nobody's business. It was a fantastic opportunity.
So before we get on to your current set of challenges in your professional life, what was because you, for those who don't know Paul, he was also, I would say, PR man for Vodafone. Would that be the right way of explaining?
Yeah.
So you went to the dark side, as journalists say.
I
but
did.
What was the biggest challenge for, because a lot of people who recruit and people who are in business listen to these shows. What was the biggest challenge for you as a journalist crossing over to a profit-driven multinational? What can you remember?
That's right. So after 7 years as a reporter, 7 or 8 years as a reporter, and ending up as an editor, finally somebody, one of the recruitment firms, called and said, there is this job at Vodafone, and this is how much it pays. And it was roughly double what I was on as an editor of a national newspaper, which is quite astonishing when you're in that position to have somebody ring and say, it's the only time I ever listened to a recruiter tell me how much the job was going to be worth before thinking about the job. And the wife acceptance factor is quite high in accepting a job that pays twice as much, I have to say. So, yes, it was time for a change, and I had been following the exploits of the telco sector since about 2001. And by this stage, it was clear that Vodafone was in the throes of buying iHug at the time, a fixed-line internet service provider. And I thought that was probably the smartest thing I'd seen in the telco sector in many years, and could potentially really put the cat among the pigeons and change the whole industry within New Zealand. So when they said, "Are you interested in the job?" I leapt at it, but it wasn't an easy transition because the journalist's view of the PR person is that they are someone who gets in the way of a good story and who tells lies all the time, and who potentially obfuscates and gets well in the way of getting the real truth out of a company. And yet, when you're inside a company, the role of the PR person is to make sure that the right news does get out, and that you end up ringing a lot of journalists saying, "Hey, this is really important. Why don't you cover it?" And trying to convince them to do a story about something that you're quite keen on reporting on. And that's quite a change of pace. There's also the issue of trying to explain to people within the business who have no idea how the media works just what news is, and that I discovered was a full-time job in and of itself, because all too often, particularly the sales people would assume that because we sent out a press release, it was automatically going to be on the news that night, and they were somehow required by law to write a story about how wonderful the company was for selling a product. And I struggled at times to explain to them that company sells product is not a news story. In fact, it's nowhere near being even a brief in the news, and it won't even be in the newspapers because it's just not newsworthy.
Right.
And that discussion went on an awful lot, and involved a lot of shouting and wailing and gnashing of teeth, I have to say, on everybody's part.
Right. Sounds like an education for both sides. Now, coming up to
I
now,
think so.
why is TUANZ? Why is it necessary for TUANZ to still exist? Telecom's been broken up. You know,
Yep.
what? Just give us your lift pitch if you can on why TUANZ matters.
Sure.
That's what I was after.
Yes. Well, TUANZ has been around for 25 years, and we've seen off a lot of the issues that have plagued the industry for many years. The lack of regulatory oversight, one dominant player monopolising the industry, people struggling to get connections at home, all that sort of thing. But that's not the end of the battle. You know, we're in an environment now where the government's investing. We've got a regulator who is very active and has made sure that some of the nonsense that's gone on in the past is removed. But there's still we're at the beginning of a new era, and I think it's vitally important that both the government and the telcos don't forget that the reason they're building these things is for people like you and I and the listeners, so that we can use them and build our businesses, teach our children, get better access to healthcare, better access to education, better access to government services, and that if we aren't involved in the process, it's entirely likely that they'll build something which actually nobody wants, and that will be a complete waste of time and opportunity.
So would you describe your organisation and what you do now as being a lobbyist?
Yes, well, that's probably the best term for it. We're not a professional lobby organisation that has people sitting in Wellington waiting for MPs to come out of meetings so that we can take them to the backbenches and shout them a boozy lunch and then flip them a document that they need to get in Parliament. But we absolutely do, for want of a better term, engage with the politicians and with the officials in government to try and make sure that whenever they are looking at our sector, they take the needs of the customer into consideration. And that's an ongoing struggle. We've got a new Telecommunications Act which has just been introduced. Part of that is to provide the environment for the breakup of telecom, as well as for the rollout of this new fibre to the home network that we're building. And there were plenty of things in there that were unacceptable to the average customer in the street, not least of which was a 10-year regulatory holiday for whoever built the network. Now, a regulatory holiday means that the regulator, in our case the Commerce Commission, couldn't regulate the industry at all with regard to the fibre to the home network until the year 2020. And we said, well, I don't know why you've got that in there, but it's completely counter to everything we've learned over the last 20 years. Without a regulator, we ended up with a monopoly provider who was seen to be, whether rightly or not, screwing over middle New Zealand. We've now got a regulator, and we're starting to see competition, and we're also, more importantly, starting to see investment in New Zealand for the first time in years. And you want to take the regulator's powers away. Why would you do that? And eventually we convinced the government that, in fact, they should change that and get rid of this clause. So I think the need for TUANZ, or at least an organisation like us, has never been stronger, to be honest.
Okay, before we get on to the good provocative subjects, how many members do you have, and what's a profile of why would I join TUANZ? Or what sort of members?
It's a good question. Yeah, we're primarily a business-led organisation, and we have around 400 businesses as members. So they range from at the high end, the bigger customers would be some of the banks. We've got the likes of Kiwi Bank, Westpac. They're on board. They see value in our lobbying abilities, all the way down to one-man band consultants who use our event schedule as an opportunity to network, to meet clients, to meet prospective employers, and to learn a little bit more about the industry. And we really do try to play both ends of the market, if you like. So we'll talk to big companies about their needs, which are often quite different from the individuals. But we also aim to make sure that someone who wants to know all about the ISP market in New Zealand or where to get a better deal for their cell phone can come to us, and we'll say we'll tell them a little bit about what they need to think about.
Okay.
So
Yep.
we really do cover the whole gamut.
Okay, so Alan Freeth, he's the Telstra man, would that be correct? He came
yes,
out.
Yes, he's the head of Telstra Clear.
A few years ago, he came out and said all the ultra-fast broadband is going to do for New Zealanders is to give them porn faster. Do you please discuss? I suppose it's like an exam here, but what do you think that's fair? Or a few times he's said that. Has he got any? I mean, it's quite shocking or surprising, I should say, for a man in his position who you'd think he'd be.
Well, that's right.
Yeah. Can you educate us on that? Is that all it is to it?
It is and it isn't. He's not wrong. You will be able to get your porn faster if that's what you're into. You'll also get your email faster. You'll be able to get access to all of the websites that you currently have a look at today at blisteringly fast speeds. And if all that the UltraFast Broadband project and the rural broadband project bring us is better browsing on the internet, then we've probably missed a trick, really, and we've missed an opportunity to do more with it. What it really brings is an increase in, particularly for small businesses, an increase in their ability to be productive and to do things that they can't do today. So speed is one of the factors of the UFB, but just as important are things like the upload speed. How fast can you send data out? And also the price point for sending that data. So if I am, for example, a photographer working in the middle of town and I want to send my photos to an American company so that they can see just how great my photography is and that they should hire me for a particular event, at the moment it is very little bit more than dial-up speed. It's quite slow, and it will take hours and hours and hours to send a good quality picture. And the problem probably from a photographer, for instance, is that they send a lower quality version of their work, and the person at the other end says, oh, well, that's not very good. It's all a bit grainy and I can't really tell what's going on. No, I'm not interested, which means you lose out on business. That's a very simple example. I know of software developers here in New Zealand who struggle with the ability to send files overseas. Even during the making of The Lord of the Rings, Weta, for example, would try to send files to Peter Jackson when he was in London cutting together the music. And rather than sending it over the phone lines, as you would expect, they gave a man a bag of tapes and sent him off to London on an aeroplane, because it was cheaper and easier to do that than sending the files overseas. And that is really quite shocking in this day and age. You'd think it wouldn't be possible that it was cheaper and easier to give a man actual hardware and put him on a plane. Surely you just hit send on the computer and off it goes. But sadly, that's the environment we're in today.
So just to take us through it for us learners, you've got the ultra-fast broadband. Tell us, give us a real heads up, very basic on that, and then a bit about the rural broadband program, because these are two quite big issues, aren't they?
They really are. They're two huge projects that are underway at the moment. So first things first, the UltraFast Broadband project aims to roll out fibre optic cable from the exchanges that are already in place around the country, from the existing network, out to 70% of New Zealand's homes. Now, 70% covers probably most of the major urban areas. I think it's something like the top 13 towns and cities in New Zealand. So if you run down the list from Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, Dunedin, Hamilton, all the way down to some of the smaller places, Hokitika, the smaller towns, they will all get a fibre network which should deliver cheaper prices and faster speeds throughout the country. But 70% isn't 100%, and the remainder of the country gets included in this rural broadband proposal, which is being run as a separate project. This is quite unusual. Around the world, lots and lots of countries are doing this kind of thing. They're saying, we're going to roll out ultra-fast broadband to the rest of the world. In Australia, to the rest of the country. In Australia, they're spending $42 billion on the project, which is an astonishing amount of money. In New Zealand, we're spending $1.5 billion on the project. We're using our capital a lot more smartly than they are. They're just throwing money at the problem. and trying to fibre up as many people as possible using basically mining cash and credit for their future generations to worry about. So what we've done in New Zealand is we've split the problem in two. We've said rural New Zealand is going to be too difficult for most of you to get fibre. You lived on a farm or you're in a remote area. So what we'll do is we will have a separate project, and for that project, the money's gone to a consortium of Telecom and Vodafone, which sounds like very strange bedfellows, but what they're doing is a mixture of fibre optic cable from Telecom out to most of the schools in the country, and from there will be a network of basically cell phone towers being built by Vodafone to provide what they call fixed wireless service from the cell phone towers to the homes. So if you imagine, it's basically a cell phone, but because it's stationary, you've got an antenna on the side of your house pointing at the tower. It gives you a much better signal and a much better quality of service than you would get off a phone that moves around the place. So they're offering rural folk the opportunity to go from the sort of dial-up or even fax machine world that they live in today, and at least dabble their toes in the broadband world of tomorrow. It's done a lot more cheaply and a lot more quickly than trying to dig up all of the country roads and lay fibre optic cable, which would cost a fortune.
Now, what's really interesting, when we had a bit of a pre-chat earlier in the week, you made a statement which was quite exciting to say that with this rural broadband, the fabric of society, Paul, you said, the fabric of society is going to change. Can you take us through that?
Well, if you think about it today, what tends to happen, and I've heard this a lot from the likes of fed farmers and rural women, and some of my own family members here in the Waikato who are farming, that the kids will go away to school in the week and they stay at school all week long, and at school they've got access, potentially anyway, to broadband services, to text messaging from via cell phone. They can access things like Facebook and Twitter, YouTube. They do all of the work in school during the week, and then on the weekends they come home, and at the moment they've got probably no cell phone coverage, dial-up speeds on the computer at best. They can't do their homework very efficiently. They can't stay in touch with their mates very well, and they can't find out what else is going on out there in the world. So what tends to happen at the moment is when they hit 18 or 19 and they head off into the world on their own, they either go to university or out to work, and they say, stuff that, I'm not going back to the farm because I miss out on everything that I've seen in school during the week. So I will stay out of the countryside. I'll go and work in the city. And we're seeing a huge influx of people from rural New Zealand into urban New Zealand, looking for jobs, but also looking for that lifestyle, in effect, that connectivity. By providing connectivity out on the farm, out in rural New Zealand, you build an opportunity for people to stay in rural New Zealand and still study, still work, and still earn city money, but manage to live in the community. So for me, that's very exciting. That says that we are entering a world where you don't have to live in the middle of Auckland unless you really choose to. We've seen massive amounts of immigration into central Auckland in the last few years. I think there's something like 50 people a day arriving in Auckland. And the rest of the country suffers as a result because, you're losing residents, you're losing ratepayers. Job opportunities end up going where there is the population, and the population ends up going where there are job opportunities. And it feeds off itself. If we can spread that load out a little bit more, I have high hopes that we would see a regeneration of our rural communities. I think that's vital to New Zealand because we live in New Zealand primarily because it's a great place to live. We've got all of this wonderful, wonderful geography. We want people to make the most use of it, and yet most people end up living in Auckland in a little wooden box. So, I try to encourage people to head out of Auckland as much as possible.
So you're saying I'll be able to do my degree, distance learning, that sort of thing, from Wanaka, or even set up my Google company in Tokoroa?
Yeah, exactly. And
is that the vision that you guys are putting?
That is the vision, yeah. And I'm glad to say I'm not alone on that. Rod Drury is the chap behind Xero.com, the online accounting service. And his dream is that New Zealand be a place where you can build billionaires from the batch. build billion-dollar businesses from the batch, he says. And, he's quite right. I want people in New Zealand to be able to have the lifestyle of living in New Zealand with the earnings of a high-powered job in Los Angeles or London or Auckland. And that's quite possible. It's happening overseas as well. There's a chap called Tim Williams, who's a good Welsh fellow who's now living in Australia, and he's written a report called Connecting Communities. And we brought him out to New Zealand a little while ago to talk about his report, and he's done some work on New Zealand. And we'll get him back in November to attend our rural broadband symposium that we're having down in Taupo. And Tim's, he's not a computer guy, he's a social scientist, and he's spent a lot of time in Britain looking at the regeneration of rural communities. And one of the areas he talks about is Cornwall. And I don't know if you know Britain very well, but it's a beautiful part of the country. It used to be full of fishing villages, beautiful little townships that have really been on the decline for the past couple of 100 years. But about 10 years ago, the trend reversed. And people are moving into Cornwall, not in their droves, but certainly in numbers big enough to reverse this trend, this declining population growth. And Tim says that two things have happened. The population's increased, and their earnings per head of population have increased as well, primarily because you've got a lot of people who have grown up in London, earned their London salaries, they love the London lifestyle, but now they want to relax a little bit. And what they do is they move to Cornwall, they train into London for meetings 1 or 2 days a week, and because they've got UltraFast Broadband in Cornwall, they can do the rest of the week's work from Cornwall, from a little fishing village in the middle of nowhere, overlooking the harbour, and earning London money, which they then spend in the community. So you're starting to see them saying, well, why can't I get a decent coffee? So somebody sets up a coffee shop. Oh, well, where's the fancy bread? Oh, well, somebody sets up a nice a bakery. And for the first time in a long time, Cornwall's actually turned a corner and is starting to see population growth and per capita income increase. And I think that's really fascinating that it's off the back of a broadband project, very similar to the sorts of things we're talking about rolling out in New Zealand today.
Yeah, it sounds fascinating. Now, the next big issue for you guys is mobile. It seems like we've all got per head of population about 3 each. Where are we at the moment? Are we still? How are we tracking as far as issues of mobile? Is it now pretty good pricing in New Zealand? I mean, what are the issues for you as a lobby group trying to look after us?
Yeah. We're in a very good place, really. If you consider where we have been in the past, it wasn't that long ago that we had Telecom and Vodafone and nobody else. Telecom used the wrong technology. They were using a technology platform called CDMA, which came out of the US. You remember the old phones didn't have SIM cards in them, and they were fine in and as they were, but the world was moving in the other direction, following the technology that Vodafone had championed called GSM. And in the last, it meant that it was very difficult to change networks. You not only needed a new phone number, you needed a new handset, and it was all really rather fraught. And Vodafone had done a great job of coming into New Zealand and taking market share off Telecom in a huge way. They introduced text messaging, which Telecom phones couldn't do at the time. They introduced 3G services, which is the sort of the broadband on your phone, so that you could watch television, or you could download, you could look at websites, you can download songs, that kind of thing. And Telecom really struggled to keep up. So a few years ago, Telecom dumped the old technology. They're about to switch off the network entirely. They've moved over to the same technology platform that Vodafone has, and they have started competing. On top of that, we've also had 2 Degrees launch, and they have really shaken up the market with new and innovative pricing packages that really are keeping Telecom and Vodafone on their toes. Telecom's results are out today, and they have shed over 90,000 customers. Vodafone's lost somewhat less. They've lost about 26,000 customers, and 2 Degrees is picking them all up, as far as I can see. And they're doing a great job of marketing simplicity, ease of use, good, friendly Kiwi service, and it's working. Clearly, customers are flocking to 2 Degrees, which is tremendous to see. So the next big issue, of course, is that these things never stand still for long. and we have a new round of investment to come in the next few years. At the moment, we have what they call 3G or third generation cell phones, and their speeds are pretty good, but it's primarily a voice and text service that just happens to be able to do data as well. The next generation of technology is called LTE, long-term evolution, and it is fourth generation stuff, and it is blisteringly fast. It's all about data. It is all about sending and receiving high definition video, watching proper movies on your phone, watching listening to high quality music, and as a side effect, also you can make phone calls on it. So we're really talking about digital devices like the iPad or the iPhone that let you do an awful lot more than you can do today whilst you're on the road, while you're out of the office. So, and that is very exciting, and that'll come in the next couple of years.
So really, years ago, you had the post office, and you got a phone, and that was in your house, and the post office was a wonderfully owned New Zealand institution. Now,
That's right.
Now you've got private investment. Can you see us going back to government investing again in the infrastructure, or not?
Well, I think that's exactly what is happening today. There is no business case for us to roll out an UltraFast broadband network in New Zealand. The telcos have not done it because they can't come up with a business case that makes it work. Yet government has realized that if we're to keep up with the rest of the world in terms of the digital economy, what they call the weightless economy, we really absolutely have to have a network that can do that and can deliver this. And they're looking not to the next quarter's results, but to the next 50 to 100 years of development here in New Zealand. And they've said, okay, there's no business case for this, but we realize it is of national importance. So we will commit $1.5 billion if the industry matches it, and we will build this network. So in many respects, we're starting to see a return to government involvement in the sector because primarily the revenues, the income that the companies get from customers is pretty flat. They're expected to invest hundreds of millions of dollars for things like LTE rollout. That's going to require 1,800 new towers around New Zealand. These networks don't come cheap. It's probably about $1 billion to roll out a network like that. And yet we will expect the price of the service to decline. We'll expect more, we expect it to be better, and we expect it to be cheaper.
Right.
And the telcos all around the world are discovering that it's very hard to convince people to give them money to invest in a network like that if you're then going to reduce the price of the product. Yet that's exactly what's happened for the last 5 or 6 years, and is going to happen for the next 5 or 6 too. So yeah, I fully expect governments to get back and get involved.
Well, so being simplistic for us people out there not as technically savvy as yourself, being simplistic, it's a bit like the superhighway. It's a bit like roading. The government pays for the roading for our cars to go on, which is commercially important. The country gets around, and I suppose what you're saying now is it's very important for us to get around in the cyberspace or the superhighway.
That's exactly right. Yes, yeah. I mean, if you think back 100 years. We were talking about exporting lamb and sheep meat to Europe primarily. That's moved on. Now the biggest export coming out of New Zealand is probably Fonterra with milk powder. But the next wave will have to be digital. And New Zealand is incredibly well placed globally to take advantage of that. Instead of having to ship expensive product to the other side of the world, physically moving it and trying to remind people in London or Washington or Berlin that New Zealand exists, we're as close to the rest of the market as anyone else. We're one click away. And if we're talking about digital content like the wonderful work they do at Weta for movie studios like FX Network, like Lord of the Rings, then you're talking about a world where they don't even know you're a New Zealand company, and they don't know that you're based in Miramar rather than in Los Angeles. And they don't care. Yet the work gets done, and the money comes into New Zealand, and we're exporting our talent to the rest of the world. And that, I think, is very exciting because we don't have that tyranny of distance. We're no longer the poor cousin at the other end of the planet with just yet another provider who just happens to have really low costs and be really, really good at what we do. And and I think we're well placed to do that.
Okay, so just the final issue, I mean, where you talked about, I hesitate to say this, the knowledge economy. And knowledge waves. You know, Labour started off with the Historical Rule, 12 years ago with a knowledge wave conference. And I'm not knocking Labour, but how is it this? Well, let's sum it up. What do you think this government's doing? Are they? Do you think out of 10 they're 2, 5, 10 out of 10?
Oh, a score out of 10 for the digital stuff. I would say they're a strong 8, bordering on a 9.
This is the current.
So yeah, the current administration, they are very practical. I have got concerns, but you know, it's two sides of the coin. On the one hand, they're very practical, very pragmatic. They've said we promised to build a network, so we're going to get the network built, and they're going to tick this off by the election, so that you can have the picture of John Key, presumably with the silver shovel, turning the sod and laying the first fibre optic cable, saying, "There you go, we promised you a network, and here it is being delivered." That's a good thing. That's very, very good. We've talked about it for 10 years, and now it's time to build it. But on the flip side, there's no real vision for what happens after that. And I would very much like to see government or somebody taking a leadership role in promoting all of the good stuff that we've just been talking about, the digital economy, what it could mean for rural New Zealand, the opportunities that are out there as a global player. The opportunities that are out there as a great place to come and live and work, and you know, I think that's something that I would have expected government to do, and they're absolutely not willing to do that. They are not a government that talks about strategies and about long-term vision. Instead, they're rolling up their sleeves, getting their hands dirty, and getting this thing built, which leaves a bit of a gap, because we absolutely do need that leadership and we do need that vision. So we'll have to do it ourselves. And I think we've got a great opportunity now to say, thanks very much, you've built it, we'll use it. And we need to start thinking about how, particularly in the small business space, how best we can use this kind of technology and this kind of capability, what we'll do with it. I'd like to see 100 of the Rod Drury companies offering services on a global scale from a batch here in New Zealand. There's absolutely no reason why we can't be doing that. And I would be encouraging anybody in business to start thinking about getting into the digital economy in a big way, because now's the time to make hay while the sun shines.
Hey,
it's a golden opportunity.
That's a wonderful and thought-provoking way to finish this interview, Paul. Thank you so much. Look, just before you go, we all love thought leaders, which you really are. Any great books, websites? What's exciting you, or gadgets? What's exciting you out of those three? You're allowed one or two, just to close. But book, website, or gadget that you're loving.
I have, the gadget I'm loving, sadly, is the iPad, and we'll probably need another hour to explain why I think Apple is evil, but the iPad is beautiful.
Right,
so I would
summed
encourage, I would encourage people to make use of these things, and it just opens your eyes to what could possibly be done out there. Books, I tend to read. I tend not to read a lot of non-fiction books. Inside me, there's a fantasy author desperately trying to get out, so I let him read all the books that he can. So, sadly, at the moment, I'm waist deep in the middle of the Game of Thrones cycle, which is about 5 trillion words long, and I don't know that I can keep track of all the characters in my head.
Now, do you realise with that chap, he's had writer's block, and there are people now hunting him down, trying to make him...
Yes. He's just released the new book, Book 5. And it's taken him 10 years to write it because he had terrible writer's block. Yeah. And isn't that interesting? You know, it's I was a journalist. You never get writer's block as a reporter because there's always an angry man standing behind you shouting for copy. So that tends to help with the writer's block quite nicely.
But, hey, that's a great way to finish. Game of Thrones and an iPad and fantasy.
For the websites, I would always have a look at a chap called Ray Kurzweil. Who's made 3 fortunes in his life. Kurzweil synthesizers, music synthesizers. He made another fortune before that. Currently, his big thing is artificial intelligence, and the way that technology moves in leaps and bounds, we're probably about 20 years away from building a computer that is cheap enough and powerful enough to replicate the actions of the human brain. And if you really think you're comfortable in your world, go and have a read of Ray's website, and he'll scare you silly, and you just know there's a grain of truth in it. So I like to keep my eye on the horizon.
Wonderful, Paul. Now, how do we get a hold of you online? What's your TUANZ address?
Yes, well, email, old-fashioned email is paul@tuanz.org.nz. Don't send it to the .co.nz. It disappears into the great bit bucket in the sky. And I'm also on Twitter at Paul Brislen, and I spend a lot of time arguing with people in 140 characters or less, which is a great way of spending your afternoon.
Paul Brislen, it's been a pleasure speaking to you, and I'm sure you'll get some new members. Thank you very much, and have a great day.
Thanks for your time.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for inviting me.